welcome to the Athens Public Library. Welcome to our first installment this spring of the Biology in Your World series, featuring biology research in the field and the laboratory. Our guest speaker is an ecology and evolutionary biology graduate student with the Department of Biological Sciences at Ohio University. Let us please give a warm applause of welcome to Elena Tokash.
So the title of this talk is A Turtle Tale. So we're here to talk about a species of turtle that's near and dear to my heart. A little bit about me. Hello, I'm holding snakes. My name is Elena Tokash. I graduated from OU last year. So I graduated with a degree in wildlife and conservation biology. And I ended up sticking around for a master's program. So now I'm in the ecology and evolutionary biology program. And this project that I'm going to talk to you about today, I've actually been working on for 2 years. So I'll introduce the topic to you, but I've been working in Maryland with this species of turtle that we're going to talk about for 2 seasons. I'll return for my final season this summer, and then work on a big research project all of next year. So just a little bit about me. I really like snakes, so there's going to be some snakes thrown in here too. I like snakes even when they decide to eat each other when I'm holding them. So this is the progression of me learning that eastern king snakes are cannibals, and I thought it was very funny. But anyway, enough about snakes for right now. Here's the little outline of what we're going to learn about today. I'm going to introduce you to diamondback terrapins, talk about their conservation, talk about why we care about terrapins, and just introduce you to some of the people that are involved in the project in Maryland and then throughout the entire range of the diamondback terrapin. So who here is familiar with the Maryland terrapins? Show of hands. Who's football fans? So this is often people's perception of what a terrapin is. You say terrapin, they're like, the football team. And you're like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Because in reality, diamondback terrapins are not brown and red or that scary. They're blue and they're adorable. And this is what they look like. Their scientific name is Malaclemys terrapin. This is the real Maryland terrapin, and I'll fight for that every single day. Fear the turtle, right? But it's quite lovely. So a little bit about diamondback terrapins. They're in the family Amididae. So what that means is that they're really closely related to a lot of the species that we see here in Ohio. So painted turtles, sliders, map turtles, all these species that are really common in Ohio, in ponds and rivers. Terrapins are really closely related to them, but they have a really, really different natural history. Terrapins do not exist in Ohio. They actually range all the way from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, down to the Gulf Coast of Texas. So that's almost the entire East Coast where these terrapins exist. And that's their preferred habitat. And they exist in this really cool space, which is at the interface of freshwater and saltwater. So they live in estuaries or brackish water environments. And that's really unique for turtles because typically you're either a freshwater turtle or a sea turtle, and no one really talks about the in-between. But these really are the only species in America that occupy this niche in brackish water. So that's always really interesting. It's something that people don't realize, that they're so widespread, and you've probably accidentally seen one if you've ever been on the coast, but you just didn't know. They're molluscivores, so they feed on snails and clams and really hard-shelled animals. So they have really strong jaws. They also eat other things like detritus, so dead animals, dead fishes, live fishes, invertebrates, and things like that in their environment. Something really interesting about them is that they're extremely sexually dimorphic. So this picture right here is actually of a full-grown adult and male, or adult female and male terrapin. So that's how big they get. So the female's on the bottom and the male's on the top, and they're both full grown. So as you can see, the female is much bigger than the male, which is really interesting. And the reason for this is that the male really only has one job, and I think we all know what that is. So there's no real reason for his body to get that big. He doesn't need to be a giant turtle. Now she does though, because she needs to pack in all those eggs. So all of that body space allows her to produce multiple clutches in a season of eggs. And that's why she gets so big. They're also really easy to sex. So these two turtles are actually about the same age. But if you look at their tails, you can tell that they're really different. And this is a little inappropriate, so I'm sorry, but I like to say, I bet you guys can probably guess who the male is looking at their tail. I like to say he's packing a little heat. So his tail is a little bit wider, a little bit longer, where hers tapers off more. And something else interesting, I said that these turtles are roughly the same age. I don't know if you guys know, but you can actually age turtles by counting the rings on their scutes. So every single, and a scute is one of those sections of their shell. And so they're like a tree in that way, in that they have an active season, and then they, are inactive during part of the year when they're hibernating. And then they go back into that active season, so they grow in increments. And so you can actually age them by counting those increments, which is always super interesting about turtles. Another thing about diamondback terrapins that's really unique to turtles is that there's extreme amounts of color variation. In Maryland, these are all photos of Maryland terrapins, and so they really vary from being kind of blue with a little bit of orange to gray to being really dark to having a mustache. The mustache ones are fantastic. But there is an extreme amount of color and pattern variation. We see turtles that have little dots, little specks, long streaks, big polka dots. I didn't have time to add all of them on here, but take my word for it, there's a lot of variation. And as you travel south, you actually start to see more color. So in Florida, a lot of the terrapins are actually bright orange. They have these amazing bright orange flecks all over their shells, and they're really incredible. And hopefully I've convinced you that they're an extremely charismatic animal. And it's been such a joy to be able to work with this species of turtle because every individual is so different. Some of them are very shy. This one, although she may look like she's smiling, she's actually really mad and trying to bite me. She's quite angry. So why are we here today? So terrapins are a species of special concern. They actually have just been listed as a vulnerable species. So what that means is that they are on the brink of becoming endangered, but they're not quite there yet. But a lot of that is a result of all these population declines that we're seeing range-wide. So all the way from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, down to the Gulf Coast of Texas, we're starting to see that these populations are dwindling and they're declining, and that's for multiple reasons. One of those reasons is that their habitat, their nesting habitat, is getting destroyed. So one of the main causes of this is the development of shorelines and people who want shorefront property. If you're going to buy property on the water, you don't want your property to erode away, so a lot of people reinforce their shorelines with riprap. But if you're a turtle and you're looking to nest, that's not very enticing and you're not very good at climbing. So this shoreline development is a huge problem for the nesting success of terrapins on the coasts, and specifically in Chesapeake Bay. Now, the photo on the right is actually at my field site in Maryland, and this is just an example of what terrapins really do prefer. They love these open, sandy areas. It's nice and right by the water. This is their preferred area for nesting. So, why is nesting such a big deal? If you can't nest successfully, you don't have enough recruitment in your population. And what recruitment means, what that refers to, is that you're trying to, generation to generation, recruit young individuals within the population. So if you have a bunch of older individuals in a population that aren't able to reproduce, that population's not going to continue to be stable and viable. Another big issue is human-supplemented predators, such as foxes and raccoons. And what human-supplemented means is that we have urban sprawl everywhere, and there's lots of species that have really thrived within that urban sprawl. I know here at OU, I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but there's actually a family of foxes that has been living on OU's campus and running through campus. People see it out their dorm window. So that's an example of a human supplemented predator where, this is an urban area in a sense, but we have animals that are really successful here. I know raccoons, particularly in Athens. I have a giant hole in my trash can from a raccoon that lives in my neighborhood. That's also an example of a human supplemented predator. So how that harms terrapins is that these turtles are coming up, they're finding places to nest within these urban areas. But as a result of these human supplemented predators being so abundant, and not having any large carnivores to keep their populations in check, they're able to sniff out these terrapin nests and destroy them and eat them. Just as an aside, one of the populations that my advisor has worked on, which was on the mainland in Maryland, he had years of his field season where he maybe found 100 terrapin nests and had 100% of them get eaten by a raccoon or a fox. So it's a big problem. It's a major concern on the mainland. Another issue is road mortality. I'm sure we all have seen turtles smashed on the roads. I'm sure we've all seen snakes smashed on the roads and other herpetofauna. Herpetofauna meaning reptiles and amphibians. So road mortality for turtles and other species of herps, that's a huge, huge issue because they're slow moving, and for some reason people do actually seem to enjoy crushing them. And I don't understand it, and I never will, but I've seen it and it's terrible. Another issue. Who here has eaten blue crab? Anybody? Oh, nobody? Okay, well if you ever go to Maryland, it's wonderful. You guys have, yeah. Not very many. But a main thing on the coast specifically or a main meal or a cultural kind of thing on the coast is eating blue crab and having crab feasts. And it's awesome. I'm wearing a crab shirt right now, which is kind of terrible, but I am. But they're a big problem. The commercial fisheries are a huge problem for diamondback terrapins, specifically because of crab pots, which is a method of catching blue crab. And the way these crab pots work is that you have a series of funnels in this little cube that is submerged underwater. And there's one here, here, and typically one on this side and on the far side as well. And these are baited traps. So in this chamber, there's some sort of bait which attracts the crabs. So the crabs get funneled in, and then they cannot get back out because there is a funnel in place. They get funneled in, and then the fisherman pulls up the crab pot and it's full of crabs. Well, if you're a little turtle and you smell something good to eat, you're also going to get funneled into these crab pots. So smaller individuals, young turtles, not big females, but young turtles and males drown in these pots. If they go in and they're submerged for greater than 8 hours, they will actually drown. So that's a huge problem in Chesapeake Bay and a little bit lower south in the Carolinas. It's a huge problem for terrapins in general. Okay, so that's a lot of problems. Where are the solutions? All of these conservation issues are always multi-layered. So where do you find a solution in all of this? And for my particular project, it came with a giant restoration project. So in Chesapeake Bay, I work on an island that sits right here, and it's called Poplar Island. And over 150 years ago, Poplar Island occupied over 450 hectares in Chesapeake Bay. So this is a big island. A hectare is equal to 10,000 meters squared. So it's an enormous island. And then over time, over these last 100 years, it's eroded away. And sorry for the quality of this photo, but the island actually eroded away to only 4 hectares. So it went from nearly 450 down to 4. So that is a huge, huge decrease in land size. So what do you do here? You have an island that has completely eroded away and that had habitat for a bunch of different animals. How is this story tying in and tying back to terrapins? Well, in the Baltimore port the Port of Baltimore shipping channel, every year they go and they dredge the shipping channel. So they go in with a big scoop and they scoop the bottom out so that ships can get in and out of the Port of Baltimore. So typically what they do with that dredged material is they ship it out to sea. So they go about 50 miles out to sea and they dump it, which is extremely expensive. So the Army Corps of Engineers back in the 90s was like, well, we have an island that's disappeared and we have all this material, maybe we should try to rebuild the island. Boom. And they did. So they've rebuilt Poplar Island. And just as a reference back to this photo, pay attention, there's this little island called Jefferson Island and that forested island called Coach's Island. And then we switch back to this new photo. And those are those same islands. So this is huge. It is enormous. They rebuilt this huge, really strange looking island in the middle of Chesapeake Bay. And interestingly, oh, and if you're interested, that little island right there, it's for sale. So they rebuilt they rebuilt Poplar Island in the Chesapeake Bay. And they rebuilt it with the sole purpose of restoring habitat. Although originally it was just a nice place to dump the dredge material, but it's really morphed into this beautiful project that is specifically geared towards restoring habitat for local fauna. So the way it works, you can see it's divided up into different sections, very strange sections. We call these cells. And so the bottom part, or this, the eastern half of the island, which is this long strip, is all going to be pristine salt marsh habitat when it's done in the middle of the century or even longer. And this whole half of the island is going to be beautiful upland forest. And it's really hard to kind of understand what you're looking at in this image, but take my word for it. It's a really incredible place, and it started to look like this. So they really have created habitat. It's hard to picture, it's hard to hone in on those cells, but this cell is actually, oh wait, how does this work? It's actually right here. So this is almost, it's an image of almost this entire cell. So you can see that it really has become a beautiful, beautiful place to work and a really important place. It's also a really strange place because it's pristine salt marsh habitat, and there's people like me, you know, aspiring scientists and other workers, the Fish and Wildlife Service out there working with the animals that are returning, but it's also an active construction site. So half of the island is still under construction. So you're here picking up a turtle in the sand and then a bulldozer goes by. So it's very strange. And I'm happy to talk more about that, but I won't try to wrap your minds around it anymore. You really don't understand it until you get to experience it. So what happened after they rebuilt the island? Or as they started to build the island even. When they finished the perimeter of the island in 2002, terrapins came back and they returned. And you know, so it goes, if you build it, they will come. So this is what a terrapin nest looked like, just so you know. It's in 2002, some of this open sandy habitat reemerged and the terrapins immediately came back. And to give you an idea of what terrapin nesting looks like, I have a little video. Where's my mouse? Oh, I just clicked it. There we go. So in this video, we actually just have a female who's finishing up. So she uses her hind limbs, and she actually will dig like a big circular kind of cavity. She'll dump her eggs in, and then she'll use her legs to sweep all that sand in and pat it up. And it's adorable and ridiculous. But there she goes. Yeah, that's actually her. A truck goes by, and she gets a little spooked. And then she just continues to pat away. And then I ran after her and dug it all up. Which we'll get to. But anyway, so this is just a little idea of what terrapin nesting looks like, and the point is that they started nesting again. So open nesting habitat opened up. So we find about 200 nests per year on average. Over the last few years, nesting has become really diffuse all over. It's diffuse throughout the island. So originally, nesting has really been isolated to these sandy areas along this part of the island and here. These are data from 2015. And as you can see, we've got turtles that are starting to move a little bit more inland, and they're starting to move throughout the island. So there's a ton of nesting here, which means there's a ton of recruitment, which is really good news for this population of turtles in the Chesapeake Bay. There are still some predators on the island. I told you that I liked snakes. I'm going to keep talking about some snakes. Convince you that we still like them even though they eat turtle eggs. So this is an eastern king snake. They're the primary nest predator of terrapins on Poplar Island. They're lovely and very kind snakes. I see your face. So what happens is they'll go and they'll burrow in, they'll eat all the eggs, they'll come out, we'll find the snake and be like, bad snake, tag it and let it go. Because they're actually not having a negative impact like those human supplemented predators would be having. So it's very much in conjunction, the population of terrapins, population of eastern king snakes are not negatively affecting one another. If anything, it's just functioning as a good ecosystem. However, we did have some pesky foxes get to the island in 2015. So you might be like, how did some foxes get over to the island? Well, the channel between the mainland and the island actually froze. So in the winter of 2015, we had 4 foxes trot over and start having a heyday and feasting during the summer of 2015. And so there were 4 foxes, and they actually did get to quite a few terrapin nests. I think we documented maybe 30 that were either fully eaten by the foxes or partially eaten. But the terrapins were the least of the concern for the foxes. They were actually also eating an endangered bird, which is why we needed to get rid of the foxes. But it did create this really interesting kind of year for us. It'd be like, see, this is the impact that these animals do have when they go unchecked, when their populations go unchecked. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has actually started to eradicate the foxes from the island. Last year there was just one that was way too smart for everyone. We only ever saw his or her tracks, but there's one still out there. And the reason that we're eradicating them again is not only because we're trying to help an endangered bird, because we want to maintain the island as this experiment without, mammalian predators. What can the lack of mammalian predators do for terrapin populations? And it increases them. So back to the crab pots. So the crab pots are still a really big issue for Poplar Island, for the area around Poplar Island. There's still a lot of commercial fishing going on. But there is a solution, and it's called a bycatch reduction device. So you can actually implant these little plastic or metal rectangles into the funnels of those crab pots. So just a reminder, here are the funnels. So you can put these little devices in, and it'll actually prevent turtles from going into the crab pot. So as you can see, she can get her face in, but she can't get all the way in. So it seems like a really simple solution, right? Like, let's just put these on all the crab pots. Well, like any good conservation issue, there's lots of push and pull, and it takes a lot of convincing. So in the state of Maryland, you are required to have these bycatch reduction devices on recreational crab pots. So if you have 2 for your own dock, you can chuck them in the water, but they have to have the devices on. The commercial fishermen are not required to have these BRDs, as we call them. And there's a lot of legislation that is trying to get passed throughout their entire range where crabbing is a big problem for turtles, but no success there yet. So this still is a problem throughout their range for terrapins. However, in light of that, terrapin population is increasing on Poplar Island. And it's actually, as far as we know, the only population in their entire range that's actually increasing. So these are the only successful terrapins out there right now. And so with that being said, the question still reigns, why do we care? Why is it important that we look at terrapins specifically? Well, terrapins do provide a really, really key ecosystem service in their habitat. Like I said earlier, they eat mollusks, and in Chesapeake Bay in particular, they eat periwinkle snails. So these are a picture of the snails. The snails are herbivorous. So the snails actually munch on Spartina, which is the salt marsh grass that's found throughout most of the coast, I think, different species of Spartina. So if the terrapins weren't there to eat the snails would eat the grass, and they would actually overgraze the grass, which is kind of funny. You think of overgrazing in terms of cows or something large, but snails can actually overgraze too. And that creates problems for the whole ecosystem because there's lots of animals that rely on those grasses for nesting or just for habitat, microhabitat, etc. However, I think the big picture for the world of terrapins is that they're an umbrella species. And what that means is that if you work to conserve this species of turtle and its habitat, you're actually putting an umbrella over tons of species throughout its habitat. So, like I said, near and dear to my heart are these snakes. Eastern king snakes, the least terns, which are what the foxes were eating, Fowler's toads, eastern garter snakes, black rat snakes. You can see I'm very snake biased. I'm really trying to convince you that we do like snakes. Blue crabs, American green frogs, smooth green snakes, black widows. I'm really just trying to give everybody the lilies. And black crowned night herons, and countless other species. I just put some of the cool ones in that I really like, but countless of species of birds, of herps, of small mammals. There's a huge, and fishes, crustaceans. You know, turtles in many parts of the world are an umbrella species for all these other organisms. So hopefully I've convinced you that they're important, and I think we all realize who doesn't love a turtle. So turtles for the sake of turtles is often enough of an argument. Just as an aside, this is a hatchling, and this was the most magical moment of my life because it's yawning. This turtle is yawning in my hand, which is quite cute. So what exactly do we do out on the island? I just told you that they built this island, and then I told you that the terrapins are doing great. But what am I actually doing out there on the island summer to summer? And we have two really big projects out there. We look at the nesting ecology of the diamondback terrapin, and what that involves is training a bunch of people to get the search image for a terrapin nest. And that's not easy. It's not good to walk. It's not easy to walk around a bunch of disturbed sand and say which sand looks like it was disturbed by a turtle, though. So that's no easy task. But a lot of us get really good at finding terrapin nests, and we go and we excavate the nests that we find if they're very fresh. We weigh the eggs individually. We take other measurements within that nest. We cover it back up. And then you can see this particular turtle is actually sitting on her own nest that we have just excavated. We put her there, and we mark the nests with some wire mesh to try to prevent the snakes from getting in, and then we tag it with flags. And then later in the season, we put this big metal ring around the nests. Any guesses why? The babies come out. So this leads me to the next part of our project, which is the mark recapture project. So when we have baby turtles emerge, we actually collect them, we take them back to a little lab space, we tag them, and we release them on the island. And we also do the same thing for adult turtles. So we go into the wetland cells, and we've set up these big nets that are called fyke nets. And if you're interested in what that is, I can draw it out for you. But it's a giant net, and it funnels the turtles in. And we do the same thing that we do with hatchlings. We collect turtles, we take them back to our lab, which is actually just a shed on the island that gets really hot. And we process them, we take various measurements, we sex them, and then we release them. And one of the other really cool aspects of this project is that we have a Head Start program. So we have a huge population. We have a huge population of turtles. And as a result, we get to do all these experiments on them. And so we get to, for those of you who aren't familiar with what a Head Start program is, we actually remove hatchlings at the beginning of the fall, and we place about 200 hatchlings a year in classrooms throughout the state of Maryland. So we've been doing this since 2005. And so the hatchlings get reared in the classroom for about 9 months, and then the kids get to go to the island and release their turtle. And sometimes that turtle gets eaten right away, which is horrible. But it's a lovely, lovely outreach thing. But what's really cool about Head Starting is that if you're a wild turtle and you live in the environment for 9 months, you're going to go from being about this big to about that big. But if you're a turtle that gets put in a Head Start program, you go from being about this big to about this big in 9 months. And so you start out as a brand new hatchling, and you're the size of a 3 or 4-year-old terrapin by the time you're done and released on the island. So that's actually what my project is going to be looking at here at OU. I'm going to be assessing the consequences of that. What does it mean to be a turtle with, kind of like puppy feet, like your feet are too big for your body. I'm going to be looking at the consequences of head starting on survivorship and growth in these terrapins. So because we have access to this huge population, and we have all these individuals that we get to work with, what's the point? What's the point of collecting all these data? And the point really is to apply it to those other systems who are less successful. So we want to take all of this amazing work that we get to do on this beautiful increasing project, on this amazing giant restoration project, and then go apply it to those declining populations and help the people who are working on those projects figure out a successful management strategy for their turtles. So those other scientists, who are they? Who are the scientists? Most of the time, you hear on the radio, on TV, read in a newspaper, scientists say this, that, and you're like, who are these people? Well, some of them look like this. And these are the people who are out getting their hands dirty, who are falling off boats. This is the 2015 crew, which was my first crew I got to work on. This is last year's crew, same thing, getting our hands dirty, falling in the water, learning all these different techniques and getting really familiar with these animals. And then there's people like the Turtle Man, who is my advisor here at OU. I get to call him the Turtle Man. I don't know. He doesn't know I'm doing this. He doesn't have his photos up here. Don't tell him. But Willem, he's been working with diamondback terrapins for 30 years. So he's been working with them since 1987 in the state of Maryland specifically. So he really is the world's leading expert on terrapins, but you wouldn't know that. So this is what some of the scientists look like. We're just trying to help out. There is also a diamondback terrapin working group, which is a huge, huge group full of hundreds of people who are dedicated just to looking at this species. And we have a meeting every few years where people gather from all throughout the entire diamondback terrapin range, somewhere in the States, to try to figure out what's going on with the terrapins and how can we help. So with that being said, is Poplar Island a success? Yeah, it's a really great success. This population is doing really, really well. But we have a lot of work still to do. They're still listed as vulnerable, even though this single population in Maryland is doing quite well. We still have a ton of work to do to try to help them in other parts of their range. And we also have a lot of work to do with bridging this gap between science and the public. This is a huge problem, communicating science and understanding it between the people up here and the people in the seats. So some of our work that we have to do is advocating for science. And if you guys aren't aware, there's actually going to be a big march on Earth Day this year in Washington, D.C. And all that's really about is just making sure that people understand that science is real and science is very important. And that we should all be fighting for the things that are important to us. This picture of this turtle, you can kind of tell that it looks quite scary. This is a really big, nasty, angry female that I pulled out of the mud because she was trying to hide from me. And it made for a really great photograph. So with all that being said, thank you so much for coming today. This was fantastic. I hope you learned something. I'm so happy to take questions. I could stand up here for 4 hours and talk to you about this project because there's so many details that I couldn't cover today. And if you're interested in following us on Facebook and seeing us get into shenanigans, there is a Rosenberg Lab page that I try to update. It's kind of out of date right now, but I'll be updating it soon if you want to like us on Facebook. So thank you.
turtles in the Head Start program that's so big?
So they're not hibernating. That's the big key, is that they don't, so diamondback terrapins actually emerge in the fall and in the spring from their nests. But what usually happens is they emerge in the fall sometime between late July and and the end of October. And so they're only active for about a month, and then it gets cold. And then they start hibernating until about the end of May. So when they're hibernating, they're not going to grow at all. But these turtles that are getting pulled from the population, put in a nice, cozy, pampered environment where they get fed every day, they're going to grow a lot. So that's the big difference. Yeah. Any other turtle questions? Yeah.
Is a terrapin a kind of turtle that lives in brackish water, or what's the identifying feature?
Yeah, terrapin, so the word terrapin, in North America, the terrapin refers to just this species. There is only one terrapin in North America. So we refer to them as the diamondback terrapin. Malaclemys terrapin is their scientific name. However, I think in Europe there are other species where their common name is terrapin. So if you hear that, it's just turtle. It just means turtle. Tortoises, terrapins, they're just turtles. So that, there is no real distinction other than just a common name. They're all turtles. Yeah.
Who killed the foxes?
Who killed the foxes? It's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Yeah, they're managing the foxes.
So, these terrapins, are they nocturnal?
No.
So I like to take fowling trips in coastal waters. So if I
Uh-huh.
wanted to see one of these rascals,
Yeah.
where would I go? What would I do?
So I'm really only familiar, I've only ever seen them in Maryland.
Okay.
So all throughout Chesapeake Bay, any nook and cranny in Chesapeake Bay where there's a little bit of, native vegetation left, you'll be
Yeah.
able to see them. If you see a distinct little triangular head in the distance, it's probably a terrapin. They are, most people don't see them because a lot of species of turtles, like painted turtles, they're very flamboyant and they get up on logs and there's 40 of them on a log and they're all basking and their feet are all displayed out. Terrapins don't do that. They're a little bit more shy. They do a lot more surface basking. So they'll come to the surface and they'll float up there and they'll catch some rays and then they'll get swooped. So they're almost 100% aquatic, except when they're nesting. I don't know that I've ever seen a male turtle out of the water, unless I caught him. But yeah, so they're a little tricky to find.
Did you guys live on the island?
No. So Poplar actually used to be a residential island. So when it was its native footprint, it used to be a residential island, but as it started to deteriorate, everybody fled to the mainland. We actually live, my advisor has a home, where is the map? Okay, so Poplar's nestled right here. We have a little house in the little cranny, so in the creek, which is called Harris Creek. And so I actually get to commute to work every day on a boat. Yeah, so it's my life isn't that hard. But so we actually, we'll drive the boat from the house around that nook and go to the island, and then we'll keep the boat at a wharf across from the island to go back and forth during the week. Yeah, it's a good deal. It's a really cool.
Yeah, put all that dredge material there. Did they do plantings or okay?
Yeah, so it's a really, really interesting process.
Mm-hmm.
So they dump all the dredge material, which is a really soupy sludge. It's gross. It's not necessarily that clean either. But they dump the dredged material, they wait for it to dry, and then they bring sand in. And then they do, it's a whole process, and then they dig the channels. So this is actually a dated image. Where's that other one? This one. You can't see it as well, but there's all these little lines in the cells. And so those are all the wetland channels that they design, and they dredge those out and create the wetland space. And then there is a service that comes out and individually plants thousands and thousands of plants of Spartina.
Did they start out making dikes to enclose the cells and then put the
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's exactly how that works. So they completed the perimeter dike first, and for a few years this was actually open to the bay. So they completed this half of the island first because that's where the water's hitting and eroding it away. Actually, they're going to do an expansion too, which I didn't mention because I don't have any good images. But on the north end of the island, they're actually going to create a big finger and make it even bigger and create an oyster sanctuary on the far side of the island, away from all the wave action. It's really neat. If you ever find yourself on your way to Ocean City, you can just take an hour detour and get a free tour on Poplar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Is the whole island a nature preserve now? or-
Yeah, so that's the plan. Right now, it's not open to the public. So it's a government site, but there are free tours that happen throughout the week in the summer months and a little bit into the fall, where you can go out and just get a tour. You have to stay in the bus, but eventually that will be the idea. That will be the idea eventually. Is that it will probably open up to tours and to people who want to go and hike around the island as a nature preserve. It's really incredible. If you love birds, the bird life out there is mind-blowing. It's the species are amazing. Yeah. Yes.
What about the island that's for sale? Why is it for sale?
Why is it first? It's just, so both of those islands are privately owned. And so this is just a little bit of information about people in Maryland and how much money they have. The island that's for sale is that little one, and the man who owns this island actually owns the wharf that is across the way over here, where we dock our boat during the week. So he bought the wharf, and the deal with buying the wharf was to also purchase the island, but he didn't really want the island. But he had the ability to make that purchase. How much? I don't know, a couple $1 million. Yeah, a couple million. This one, this is a really cool island too. This is also privately owned, and there's lots of bald eagle nesting out here, and people come and hunt. There's actually a white-tailed deer population on Poplar, which is interesting because deer can swim a lot longer than you think. Yeah.
You were talking about saving the terrapin as an umbrella species.
Yeah.
You were showing those other related species that need that same environment. You showed a black-capped heron.
Oh yeah, black-crowned night heron.
Black-crowned night heron.
Yeah.
And it looks like our green heron. Does it have that same ability to extract its neck out?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And there are green herons on the island. There's actually black-crowned night herons in Ohio too.
Oh.
Yeah, so they're really isolated to lots of pristine wetlands around Ohio. But yeah, there are black-crowned night herons in Ohio. I just showed that one because it was one of my favorite species to find on Poplar.
What are they using for the rest of the island? What are all those little plots and things up there?
The plots, like the
Yeah,
sections.
and the rest of it.
I don't know which.
What is that? Are they farms or what?
Oh no, so they're the island's just divided up into different. We call them cells. And so what the Army Corps is doing is that they're finishing the island cell by cell. So they're starting around here and they're working their way this way. And they're going in and planting each cell individually. So they're all going to be just wild habitat.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah.
There could be condominiums, you know, right?
There could be. There are lots of islands in Chesapeake Bay that have housing on them. Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering about continuing political will to fund
Yeah.
this project. And so in connection with that, I was remembering, I think that you said that protecting terrapin habitat is also good for the blue crabs.
Yes.
And so is it possible to get support from the blue crab fishermen?
Right now, it depends on where you are on the East Coast. In Maryland, they're not that open. They're just not that open to the ideas. In the Carolinas, there's a lot more conversation between, the people working with terrapins and the watermen. And there's a lot more just communication about how these bycatch reduction devices that we put on the crab pots don't actually reduce blue crab catch. they're just an extra hassle for the watermen. And you know, this is a long, long tradition of people being raised and going in and being crabbers or clammers or, you know, working with the oysters. And it's hard to break those traditions, so, or add something to them. So that's where the breakdown really comes from.
Are the blue crab populations not themselves declining?
They are.
Well then,
They
this
are.
is an economic interest.
It is, yeah.
So that should be of concern for the
Yeah.
fishermen. even if
Logically, yes. In Maryland in particular, the governor is quite pro-waterman and quite anti anything else and any communication between any sort of people who are coming in and saying, hey, we're really interested in the turtles, but it also helps you. He's just like, nah, screw the turtles. You know,
Maybe
conservation is an extremely political, disciplinary, you know, discipline, and it's an interdisciplinary science, and that's where a lot of the breakdown comes. You know, we could stand here all day long, and I could convince you that, you know, this is a good idea, but actually getting it going there's a lot of pushback. But there is better communication in other parts of the terrapin range right now. Part of our issue is that we're not in Maryland all year long. You know, we're here in Ohio, which the reason for that is that my advisor actually grew up in Maryland, so terrapins have always been near and dear to his heart. So that's why he's worked with them, but he got the job in Ohio, so you go back and forth. But people who are established in the terrapins range, there's actually like a lot of what we call ghost pot cleanups. You can imagine one of the bad things that happens with these pots, they're attached to a really long line that has a float on the top. Well, if somebody who's come into their summer home and isn't quite aware of the crabber, or you know, of the watermen and of these floats, the prop, you know, the propeller of a boat cuts that line, and then it's a pot at the bottom of the bay that just continues to bait animals in. So animals get in, they die, it baits other animals in, it's this horrible cycle. So that's a big problem for turtles too. There are a lot of watermen who go out and participate in ghost pot. So when they built the Nelsonville bypass, they did put culverts under the road for native wildlife, mostly for herps, for things like newts that are migrating to wetlands to go breed, and other salamanders and turtles and things that, you know, move across the road to go find, you know, a mate or a place to breed in the spring. And so they didn't do the initial study to be like, well, where are the animals moving across this space? Instead, they built the road and said, oh, let's just put it here and see if it works. Well, it's not working, and it needs to go down the road a little ways for it to actually be a really good culvert for these animals. But yeah, eco-passages are an amazing thing for all different species of animals. But yeah, in Nelsonville, it's really not working. I don't know that there's anybody doing that for the terrapins. There's lots of people working on road mortality, but most of that comes in the form of a drift fence. So what they do is along the highways where there's lots of terrapin activity, they put a big fence and they funnel them to a safe spot or a spot where there's good nesting habitat. However, sometimes those fences fail. And so then you still get organisms going across the road, and you know, it's a never-ending battle. Interestingly, in New York City, one of the airports, I can't remember which airport it is right now though, I'm drawing a blank, but in the spring, when the terrapins become active again, they get hundreds and hundreds of terrapins, female terrapins, moving onto the airway to try to nest. And there's people who it's their only job is to call off planes from landing to be like, I gotta go pick up a turtle. So I know people and that's their job right now. But yeah, you know, if the space is there, you know, it's their space. They were there first, and we just put these you know, structures on it. So we're the ones who are in the way. Yeah.
You mentioned you mark and recapture studies.
Yeah.
How do you mark them?
Okay, so we have two different methods for marking. One of them is called a pit tag, which is a passive intermittent transmitter. And it's this little glass tube, essentially, that we insert into their inguinal area, so in their, like their inner thigh, essentially. in a spot where it shouldn't bother them. So we insert it with a big needle, and it's a passive thing. Actually, I think in one of these photos you can see the device we use to scan it. But yeah, we have a scanner, and you actually scan the animal, and it beeps up a code for that animal. We also use another type of tag for the adults called a monel, it's called a monel tag. So we actually drill into their outer scute and collect tissue from that, and then we put a tag on them, which is a 4-letter code that also corresponds to it. So if they lose one or the other, then we still know who it is. The hatchlings we do something a little different. So I don't know if you've ever held a baby turtle, but they're squishy. So they're not hard, they're really, really squishy. They're like potato chips for herons. So what you do when we collect hatchlings when they emerge is we actually give them a code, a notch code. So most turtles have 12 scutes on either side of their shell, on the upper part of the shell called their carapace. And so we have a code, and it'll be something like 2R6L. So we'll cut a little notch in the 2nd scute on the right and on the 6th scute on the left. Does that make sense? Yeah. So then as they grow and we recapture them, we're like, we caught this as a hatchling, and this is the year we caught it, which corresponds to that code. They also get a really tiny little coated wire tag in their leg, which is like a little tiny piece of metal. So whenever we catch a young turtle that's unmarked, we put it through a metal detector, and if it lights it up, we know we saw it before. So it's really neat. Anybody else? Turtles? Yep.
Does anybody eat them?
As adults?
Did people eat them? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's a long history of terrapins as meals.
It's good.
Yeah. Terrapin soup used to be a huge, huge thing. And interestingly, terrapin soup, it was like a delicacy in Chesapeake Bay and down the range, but that kind of ended with prohibition because you use sherry to cook terrapin soup. So when prohibition happened, there's this really interesting space in like the genetic history of diamondback terrapins, because all those terrapins that were being farmed, they were like, well, we can't make soup anymore, so they just dumped them. So someone did, and they were from all throughout their range. So the genetic story is incredible, and there's a student in my lab who did a whole project, his whole dissertation on how the effects of prohibition on terrapin gene flow. But so it's banned. It's illegal in the state of Maryland to harvest terrapins now. There are still states where you can farm them. I don't think it's legal to harvest them anymore, though, from the wild. It still happens. It's a bigger issue. It's a bigger issue in some states more than others. People still illegally poach them and send them, to Asia and to China mostly. So that still happens, but right now, not very many people eating turtles, unless they're snappers. People still eat a lot of snappers. Yep.
Do you know anything about the turtle populations in this area? Are they declining?
It depends on what species you talk about. So box turtles are not doing well in most places. Box turtles, from road mortality, habitat fragmentation, their populations are really, really down. And there's a student actually who, her name is Marcel, she's actually going to be working on the Nelsonville bypass project with box turtles. That's going to be her primary species of concern, and figuring out if they'll use the culverts over there, if there's a population over there. But road mortality and habitat fragmentation, in addition to people taking box turtles from the wild, because they are a really charismatic and fun animal, that's a big problem for them right now. Other species are doing okay. Painted turtles are okay. It depends on where you are in their range. Around here, they're doing great. In Ohio, we also have a species of turtle called the spotted turtle, which I don't know if you've ever seen a spotted turtle or an image of one. They're beautiful, they're small, and they have yellow polka dots all over them. And they're isolated to Northeast Ohio right now, and they're really declining as well. So it's illegal to pick one up at this point. So it depends on which turtle you talk about, but for the most part, a lot of our common species are still common, and a lot of our rarer species are not doing so hot. Yeah, and there's subspecies we really don't know. So snapping turtles, lots of people still harvest snapping turtles from the sides of the road to eat them. Specifically down here in Southeast Ohio, I've seen this happen. So no one's really working with them though, so we don't know what impact that's having right now. So yeah, there's some information that's just not there right now. Anything else? That one a lot better than I thought. Yeah.
There was a really cute picture that you accidentally showed. It was
Oh,
mouth
the grebe.
of a turtle.
Is
Is that a bird?
It's a bird. It just dawned on me. Terrapins, or most species of turtles, have temperature sex determination. So like we have chromosomes, right? So I'm XX, so I'm female, XY, you're a male. Terrapins don't have sex chromosomes. So if, as a turtle, if you're incubated in a really, really warm environment, so there's no shade, you're more than likely going to be female. And if there's a bunch of shade, you're more than likely to be male. So on the island, there's like 5 trees. So we don't have a lot of shade. So our sex ratio is 9-to-1. So for every 1 male, there's 9 females. So it's really, really skewed towards females. Really, really skewed, which is interesting. So most species of turtle are temperature sex determination. And alligators and crocodiles are too.
Do the male turtles and the female turtles have trouble connecting?
No, actually, and interestingly, we see in the spring, when it starts to get really warm, you see a lot of mating aggregations. So they don't have any trouble finding each other. And a lot of species of turtles, like terrapins, can actually store sperm. So they can, and box turtles can too, so they can go a few years without seeing a male and still produce fertile clutches of eggs.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
They have little refrigerators.
yeah. But no, it's just somewhere in their reproductive system.
How long do they live?
That is an unknown. In the wild, so we have a turtle in captivity, which is from my advisor's first season working in Maryland, and he's 30. He is 30 years old, and he is at OU if you want to meet him. But in the wild, they can live upward of 30 years with ease. But things like propeller strikes, crab pots and road mortality prevent a lot of these old individuals from getting there. But definitely many decades. But yeah, we don't know that for sure, which is cool. There's still a lot of unknowns. Yep. We good?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. This was great.